Good evening, everybody. My name's Sarah McDougall. I'm Director of Scholarship at Ben Uri, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the third of our talks in the series accompanying our current exhibition, Lancelot Ribeiro, Heads in and Out of Our Time. We're really lucky this evening to be joined by Simon Lake, who is an incredibly knowledgeable speaker and is the former curator of the Leicester German art, Expressionist art collection at Leicester Museums and Galleries. And Simon's going to be speaking to us this evening about Lancelot Ribeiro as an Expressionist. I will be operating the slides for Simon, but we will be very happy to take any questions at the end. So you can pop anything into the chat as we go along, or wait to the end and then put it into the chat then. So I will disappear and I will leave you with Simon, and I'm sure you'll enjoy this evening's talk. Thank you.
Just one comment, Sarah.
Yes, Simon.
You're happy to change the images when I indicate?
I am, yes.
That's great. Okay.
Please start when you're ready.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and my thanks to Sarah McDougall for that introduction, and to the Ben Uri Gallery for the invitation to give this talk entitled Finding an Indian Expressionist, Tensions, Innovations and Visions in the Work of Lancelot Ribeiro, coinciding with the gallery's current exhibition, Lancelot Ribeiro, Heads in and Out of Our Time, an exhibition conceived in the artist's lifetime, but never realized by him, but now brought excitingly to life. And so a little bit about myself. I'm a Leicester-based freelance curator and researcher, but for a number of years, I was the art curator at the Leicester Museum and Art Gallery, home of the fine, acclaimed collection of early 20th century German art, particularly rich in Expressionism. It also has an important group of works by Lancelot Ribeiro, and in 2018 hosted a retrospective exhibition of the artist's work. The artist's daughter, Marcia, who has worked tirelessly to bring her father's artistic legacy back into the public eye, also presented the museum with a fine oil painting entitled Townscape from 1962. And next slide, please. Thank you. So on the right is Untitled Townscape from 1962, Oil on Board, which was presented to Leicester, and an image of Lancelot Ribeiro on the left. The artist who embraced Expressionism, the revolutionary art movement which emerged in Europe, particularly Germany, at the beginning of the early 20th century, produced art which embodied a powerful emotional reaction to the world around them, using powerful black contours, vibrant primary colours and pulsating compositions. These artists sought to look beyond externals, animating a deeper spiritual response to the tensions of a crowded, rapidly industrialising world. Leicester has an acclaimed collection of German Expressionist art, and it becomes increasingly clear that the term Indian Expressionist is an apt title for Lancelot Ribeiro, which I hope to offer fulsome evidence in this talk. Ribeiro, in his artistic career, which lasted for over 50 years until his death, saw him experience tensions, displacement from India to Britain, finding and developing his artistic voice, evolving through external influences, but also through innovation and experimentation. His roots were his Roman Catholic and Goan Indian heritage, familial connections and bonds. Ribeiro's artistic journey also absorbed and reflected the societal tensions of a modern world, which had witnessed the destruction of world wars and in India itself, monumental upheaval of partition. The artist showed early promise with his first sellout solo exhibition at the Bombay Artists Aid Centre in 1961, followed up by a high-profile commission for a mural from the Tata Steel Company and several further shows. In 1950, aged just 16, and with the family's cautious blessing, he left his native India for London to pursue training in accountancy, which was soon abandoned in favour of a full-time artistic career, following in the footsteps of his more well-known half-brother, the Indian artist Francis Newton Sousa. Lance Ribeiro worked prolifically and tirelessly to establish his own career, becoming a leading advocate for new progressive groups such as the Indian Painters Collective. His early works were distinctly expressionist in tone, spiky, forceful landscapes and townscapes featuring religious motifs and strange angular structures. Becoming dissatisfied with the slow-drying speeds of traditional oil paints when set against the prolific working pace he always continued, Ribeiro embarked on a phase of research and experimentation in the early 1960s, working with the medium of polyvinyl acetate, or PVA, then mainly used as an industrial and commercial adhesive and binder. Ribeiro produced new canvases featuring disembodied or faceless heads and landscapes with constantly shifting forms, and using the novel fast-drying finishes, created some incredible and very striking, memorable works. His pioneering work helped pave the way for the arrival of artists' acrylic paint. A permanent move to England followed, with Ribeiro establishing a new family with its own pressures and joys. After his death in 2010, aged 77, interest in Ribeiro's work revived, initiatives including the lottery-funded Retracing Ribeiro project, helping to reevaluate his legacy as an Indian expressionist painter of international stature. The process enriched by acquisitions of Ribeiro works by the Ben-Uri, Tate, the Victoria and Albert Museum, Leicester, and others. But first, and with apologies to Marcia Ribeiro, the artist's daughter, who covered this so beautifully in her recent talk, Ben-Uri, on her father from Bombay to Belsize Park, I offer some details of Lancelot Ribeiro's origins. Lance, as the artist later preferred, was born Lancelote Jose Bellarmino Ribeiro in Bombay, now Mumbai, on November the 28th, 1933. His mother Lilia was a busy milliner and tailor, and his father Yao was an accountant. Lilia had a son, Francis, from her first marriage in Goa. After her first husband Joe's death, Lily moved to Bombay with her infant son Francis, later to become the well-known Indian artist F.N. Sousa. Remarried, and her family soon grew, with the arrival first of Lancelot, followed by his sister Marina. And next slide, please. Here's a photo of Ribeiro as a baby with his mother Lily at 1934. Ribeiro's mother Lily's outlook had been shaped in part from her earlier life in Goa, then a Portuguese colony, with its religious and cultural traditions shaped by successive waves of Jesuit missionaries. Indeed, she named Francis after the Jesuit missionary to India, St. Francis Xavier. According to the family, she exerted a strong formative influence on both Ribeiro and his elder half-brother Francis as boys, and the two brothers would remain in loyal contact with each other throughout their lives. And the next image. This is the Hera building, which overlooks the bustling Crawford Market in Bombay, picture from the early 20th century. Ribeiro had spent his early years in a loving, bustling family environment, the family home in the Hera building. His interests ranged across science, literature, philosophy, and art, and he would develop an encyclopedic mind, which proved invaluable through his life. He received a traditional Catholic education, with religious and church motifs, imagery, and symbols appearing in his later paintings. After schooling in Bombay, he attended the St. Mary's Senior Cambridge School, a boarding school in Rajasthan run by the Irish Christian Brothers, a sect known for their harsh schooling and teaching methods. His experiences at the school between 1942 and 44 left painful memories. Both Ribeiro and his brother Francis had experienced childhood in an India which, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, witnessed its momentous and turbulent independence in 1947, resulting in the partition of India into two alongside the new independent country of Pakistan. In 1942 in Bombay, Mohandas Gandhi had launched the Quit India movement, quickly becoming an unstoppable political force. David Buckman, in his authoritative 2014 biography of the artist, Lancelot Ribeiro, An Artist in India and Europe, cites the distinguished poet R. Parthasarathi, a lifelong friend of Ribeiro following their 1955 meeting in Bombay. Parthasarathi said, "To me, the two most significant events of the 40s were independence and the horrors of partition, leading to the deaths of millions of Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims. Gandhi's assassination on January 30th, 1948, by an extremist Hindu as well. These two events continue to reverberate to this day." In 1947, the Progressive Artists Group was founded in Bombay, with Sousa, Syed Haider Raza, Makbul Fida Hussain, and Krishnaji Ara among its founder members. The group offered an internationalist outlook, combining Impressionist colour, also Cubist and Expressionist elements to present an alternative to the traditional art and iconography of the Indian Bengal school. Importantly, the group received valuable support from an unexpected quarter, 3 Jewish exiles who had survived the European Holocaust: the Austrian geologist and scholar Rudy van Leyden, who was also the part-time art critic for the Times of India; Emanuel Schlesinger, who with von Leyden would later collect Ribeiro's work; and the painter Walter Langhammer. Schlesinger commissioned paintings which he used on promotional material sent to clients of his pharmaceutical company, in turn attracting a cultured crowd towards the creative, artistic milieu in 1950s Bombay. To England, 1950 to 55. The following decade after India's momentous independence saw other countries formerly under the rule of the British Empire achieve their own independence. It was also the decade when first Sousa, then his younger brother Ribeiro, would journey to England, both seeing new and significant developments in their artistic careers. And next image, please. The P&O steamship Multan, which was the vessel on which Ribeiro travelled, in which Ribeiro travelled to England, a voyage taking 21 days, embarking on August the 26th, 1950. Ribeiro's brother Francis had settled in London with his wife in 1949, and it was his suggestion that his younger brother follow in his footsteps to study accountancy. However, on arrival in the damp and rather dour city, Ribeiro found his lofty notions of rapid success and positivity giving way to a fear that he had made a mistake, a feeling of which he later wrote with startling clarity. It was a dull, grey, heavily laden, aqueous day, depressing wetness that got to the bone. I was up early that morning, plagued and tormented by my decision to come to a place I felt I was so misinformed about. Ribeiro's changing emotions, initially feeling that Britain offered a golden opportunity, but that the certainty he had felt in India, began to rapidly evaporate on arrival in a city still bearing bomb-damaged scars of war, and with Sousa had shown his work in the capital at an exhibition of Indian art held at Burlington House, he was having mixed success as well, some commercial galleries showing interest, but others showing little interest. Next image, please. Here is Ribeiro and his brother Sousa in London in 1950. They had a close relationship, hitting it off almost immediately. Out and about in London, Sousa introducing Lance to a number of new contacts, showing him new galleries. It was a chance to be able to visit the national collections up close, the Impressionists and Old Masters, whose canvases he'd only previously seen in reproduction. Ribeiro lodged with Francis and his wife in Chalk Farm in London. He is also on record as attending life drawing classes from 1951 to 53 at St Martin's School of Art, which had moved to its current building in Charing Cross Road during World War I. He was also becoming a studio assistant unofficially to his older brother, helping him prepare canvases and materials. He began to produce his own paintings on prepared paper supports. And next image, please. Here we have a life drawing from 1958 from St. Martin's. And on the right, Untitled Townscape, 1958, oil on paper. So there's quite a freedom in Ribero's application of paint here. A darkly dramatic cluster of thickly painted and pointed roofs in this work, which holds a striking presence, but is yet to demonstrate the commanding assurance of Ribero's later paintings. And next image, please. Here's Untitled Townscape from 1958, oil on paper, approximately 40 centimeters high by 30 across. Already a young painter who is eager to engage with his subject, you see a powerful elemental array of angled forms, roofs and spires, and working closely alongside his brother. Sousa's stylistic influence is quite apparent in the younger artist's work, who had yet to experience and achieve his full independence artistically, but it would ultimately manifest itself in his later works. Although based in London, Ribero enriched his cultural outlook with a number of study trips to Europe, particularly Paris, where he was able to absorb the French art scene. Being away from the dreariness of Britain meant that for a time, Ribero was not compelled to begin his 2-year national service, a requirement for British Empire nationals residing in Britain, as well as British nationals. But the authorities eventually caught up with him, and on August the 23rd, 1954, Ribero was conscripted into the Royal Air Force. Next image, please. Ribero shown in the front row in the centre. He survived basic training, including some attempts at bullying, which he stood up to very, very well. He was posted to Scotland, and he was involved in having to shoot rabbits who were suffering from myxomatosis, a particularly unpleasant disease which had arrived from the continent. Ribero had learned to handle a weapon, but he kept confiding to friends that he didn't want to shoot anyone. In the end, with the help of his brother and the intercession of the former High Commissioner for India, he was released on compassionate grounds, which was lucky for him because the following year after his release, the serious political tensions around the attempted nationalization of the Suez Canal in Egypt broke, and this was quite a crisis for international trade because it went through the Suez Canal, which Egypt controlled. After receiving his discharge, Ribero's fortunes changed again, and he found himself returning to India. India, 1955 to 1962. So Ribero returns to the family home in the Hero Building, Bombay, and initially found work as an insurance agent. Not where his future direction lay, but nonetheless he built valuable contacts. He also developed an abiding interest in poetry, befriending a promising young Indian poet, R. Pasarathi, an undergraduate who Ribero met in 1955 at a poetry meeting held in Bombay under the auspices of the British Council. Both young men wrote and discussed their poetry at meetings held at Ribero's parents' home, and Marina, Ribero's sister, often joined in the conversations. In 1959, Ribero's resolve to become a full-time painter was complete, and had virtually superseded his initial desires to be a poet. In the same year, he met his future wife, Ana Rita Pinto Correio, while walking on Kalanguta Beach in Goa. Quietly spoken, Ana was from a well-respected family in Portuguese Goan society. They married in May 1960 in Colaba, Bombay. And next image. Here on the left is the wedding picture of Ana and Lance with his brother Sousa on the far left. And a wonderful expressionist tinged portrait of his wife Anna from 1960, oil on canvas. That summer, Ribero's friend Parthasarathi travelled to Panjim, the original Portuguese name for what is now Panaji, Goa. He travelled by boat and marvelling at the riverside buildings and the fusion of Portuguese architecture and Indian culture that had so captivated Ribero. He wrote all along the River Mandovi, whitewashed bungalows with imbricated tiles nestled in groves of palm trees. Churches rose in prayer from every hilltop. He was overwhelmed by the blend of Portuguese and Indian cultures and remarked Old Goa was a bit of medieval Europe transplanted onto Indian soil. These words offer a glimpse into the early sensibility of both friends and their absorption and openness to the hybrid resonance of Goan Indian culture and its poetic and artistic possibilities. Next image. Two photographs taken by Ribeiro, one of Panjim village and bottom right, the Jesus Church of Old Goa. So these motifs would appear regularly and consistently in Ribeiro's forthcoming and later works. In April 1961, Ribeiro held his first solo exhibition at the Bombay Artist Aid Centre, opened by Rudy von Leyden. It was a major step, bringing together the best of his artistic production over the previous 5 years. Press coverage was positive. The Times of India noting that the new works have a touch of Buffet, a French painter then in vogue, noted for his spiked forms, dark contour lines, and muted colours. Also remarking, Ribeiro knows what he wants and goes all out for it. Another writer for design proposed that Ribeiro could not be ignored. His art possessed of a stature that cannot pass unnoticed. Next image, please. There we have on the left, Untitled Image of Christ, 1961, oil on canvas. Ribeiro's better-known artist, Brother Sousa, was noted for his paintings of heads, sometimes regal, sporting pointed crowns and strikingly stylized in appearance. Here on the left, Ribeiro's own study of Christ wearing a crown of thorns, black tears staining his face, and a raised hand showing the stigmata, symbolizing the pain of his crucifixion, is very striking. The palette somber and muted, giving a melancholic feel, and the artist's Portuguese Goan roots undoubtedly inspiring this gaunt portrayal. A patterned background also has dark lines, perhaps suggestive of lacerations or wounds. And on the right, F.N. Sousa's The Herald, oil on canvas from 1961. For context, Sousa, for the first 6 years in London, experienced multiple rejections from galleries. But in 1954, he became an overnight sensation when his biography, Nirvana of a Maggot, was published by Stephen Spender in the magazine Encounter. Suddenly, galleries started taking interest in the iconoclastic and witty artist. Victor Musgrave, the owner of Gallery 1, hosted a new exhibition. In 1961, the gallery held a subsequent show of Sousa's work in which the Herald was shown. Heralds were medieval messengers, but Sousa shows this one grimacing with a rather grim visage, an angry head, similar to some of the kings and angels he would later produce. Ribeiro, in a 1972 lecture given at the Commonwealth Institute in London, candidly cited the influence of his older brother in his early phase of his career. And he also explained that his landscapes did not represent specific locations, but featured the churches and statuary of the Catholic Church in Goa, along with the symbolic ritual that went with it. The other and perhaps the strongest influence were the paintings of my brother, and we've heard that Ribeiro had acted as his studio assistant. Next image, please. This is untitled Goan Landscape with Church from 1964, oil and PVA on canvas, 74.5 centimeters high by 178.3 centimeters, 2.5 approximately by almost 6 foot across. This canvas, one of Ribeiro's early experiments combining oil paint and polyvinyl acetate, is impressive in size and offers a powerful evocation of the religious motifs which had so inspired Ribeiro and the landscape. The golden frontage of a twin-spired church can be seen on the left, with blocked, unusually angled buildings grouped nearby. What is striking is the buildings interconnecting with powerful pathways spread across the foreground, akin to exposed ancient root structures, perhaps the artist envisioning the centuries-old pathways and routes of colonial trade. Growing recognition and a prestigious commission from Tata Steel. Soon after the success of his solo show, Ribeiro had come to the attention of one of his early patrons, Homi Jehangir Bhabha. Dr. Bhabha was an Indian nuclear physicist who oversaw the country's nuclear program and was also a founding director of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. It was through Bhabha that Ribeiro was commissioned in 1961 to paint a 12-foot mural for the chairman of Tata Steel, J.R.D. Tata. The mural can still be seen today in the firm's headquarters in Mumbai. And next image, please. So here we have the Tata Steel mural. Again, the iconography of old Goa with churches and serried buildings arranged architectonically, and a wonderful, rather angry sky and a dark contoured sun. So again, expressionist overtones presenting in this canvas. Arts and Events magazine noted Ribeiro's ability to tackle with confidence the formal problems of a large canvas. And during this period, Ribeiro attracted further patrons and collectors. Rudy von Leyden, Emanuel Schlesinger, also Edward J. Fielden, the chairman of advertising agency J. Walter Thompson. Two further solo exhibitions followed Ribeiro's show at the Artist Aid Centre, the first at Jehangir Art Gallery in Mumbai, in September 1961. Established in 1952 by Keku Gandhi, the gallery had become a key venue for contemporary Indian art. Rudy von Leyden, Emanuel Schlesinger, and Walter Langhammer attended the exhibition. In April 1962, the artist held his third solo exhibition in New Delhi at the Kunika Art Centre. This proved to be a major draw. One key visiting was the First Lady, Jackie Kennedy, wife of President John F. Kennedy. She went so far as to request a meeting with the artist, who was invited to a gathering where she was present. The media response was positive once more, acknowledging Ribeiro as a new force to be reckoned with. For the art critic of the New Statesman, New Delhi, Ribeiro's new works now revealed a powerfully conceived image, a perfectly lucid vision in his mind, and what he puts down with strong strokes of his brush or palette knife communicates this vision with undiminished force. Next image, please. This is Landscape 1, Oil on Board, 1961. This painting was chosen as the promotional image on the invitation cards for Ribeiro's first solo show in 1961, and it's not hard to see why. Ribeiro articulates a confident modernist composition of tall buildings with pointed roofs topped with spine-like extensions. On the left, a severe tower, deconstructed with jagged outer walls, reaches skywards to a dark, fiery sun. Probably the size we think would be perhaps 5.5 feet by 4.5 feet, so quite impressive in scale. It appears that the painting may have been purchased from the exhibition by Edward Fielden of the J. Walter Thompson Agency. The works of Ribeiro across this emerging phase, also growing success and recognition, was telling and demonstrate the crystallization of his vision, a vision of a hybrid urban world, not of people, but of jagged urban structures, dwellings and trees lit by calm stars, or turbulent suns or floating planets. The young expressionist artists of Germany in the early 20th century also broke free from traditional artistic strictures, creating equally spiky landscapes and cityscapes, reflecting their reaction to the tensions of modern experience. Next image, please. On the left, Lionel Feininger's The Gate, woodcut, and on the right, the leader of the Die Brücke artists, based in Dresden, Ernst Kirchner, with his Red Elizabeth Riverbank, 1912-1913. Ribera, albeit with decades and a continent separating his work from theirs, but embraced a parallel modernist aesthetic on his own emerging visual terms. Next image, please. On the left, Untitled Landscape, Oil on Board from 1962, and on the right, Clown from the 1960s. Whilst busy with his painting, Ribeiro has not completely left his poetry behind, and he's recorded as taking part in a poetry reading for the British Council at the Bombay English Association in August 1961. He was joined by his friend Parthasarathi, Nissim Ezekiel, and M. Rodriguez. And the following year, he had an unexpected encounter with the American beat poets, including Allen Ginsberg, while visiting Bombay. After reading their poems at the home of theatre director Ibrahim Al-Qazi, American poets walked to Ezekiel's house, where in turn Lance and his friend had the amazing opportunity of reading their poems aloud. There was also an undying compulsion to create and to push through to greater levels of productivity and creativity outside his poetry for Ribeiro. From the mid-1960s, this would lead him into a rewarding phase of experimentation with polyvinyl acetate, PVA, a forerunner of modern acrylic paints. Next image, please. A selection of paints at the upper left, shown at the 2018 exhibition at the Leicester Museum and Art Gallery, the Ribeiro Retrospective. And on the right, samples of dyes and PVA mixtures sent to Ribeiro following his instructions and correspondence with key companies, including Ciba Geigy. By the end of 1962, before his move to Britain for a second time, Ribeiro had now succeeded in holding 10 shows, both solo and group exhibitions. These included the 10 Indian Painters touring exhibition sponsored by UNESCO, and the Indian Writers Association, which reached cities in India, Britain, and North America. In mid-1962, he flew back to London, reuniting with his brother, and the following year was joined by his wife and daughter. Ribeiro was developing greater fluency in his handling of the oil paint medium, applying and layering paint with brush and palette knife. His frustration, however, lay in the slow drying time of oil paint. A sound understanding of traditional oil paint technique had to allow for the base layers to dry fully before overpainting, but this was too slow for impatient Ribeiro. He sought out methods and materials to achieve a faster pace, and his experiments, several hundred in fact, on all sorts of supports, including hardboard and paper, at his home in 41 Belsize Park Gardens, produced results rapidly, and these filtered through into his paintings. Next image, please. Here he is standing in front of Untitled Townscape of 1964, oil and PVA on paper laid on board. His paintings now took on a new appearance with an increasing element of abstracted forms coming to the fore. Organic, swirling foregrounds, partially enveloped or lifted up and displaced buildings, which themselves were possessed of a pulsing energy, surrounded by clouds, atmospheric forms, and suns looking down balefully. He conducted his work on canvas and started to produce sculptures. Some of his imagery becoming less structured and linear, the forms much more looser, as explained. Some began to appear less solid, the term embryonic sometimes used to describe their appearance. Next image. This is Townscape from 1966, approximately 30 by 50 centimeters. Here, some of Ribeiro's imagery includes strange tuber-like forms which seem to erupt in and around the houses, which again have a looser construction to his earlier painting. His motifs and his method of execution would often jump back and forth. Sometimes his interest would be in much looser, abstracted forms. At other times, the dark construction and angular approach of his earlier paintings would come back to the fore. He still retained the influence of works of his elder brother Sousa, however, but nonetheless, he began to produce his very noted heads, particularly of the series Psychedelic Man of the mid-60s. And next image, please. Sometimes Ribeiro's heads could have a psychological edge which could be quite disturbing. But here, these are hybrid, perhaps more carnivalesque in appearance. On the left, sage with coloured ribbons from 1964, oil and PVA on an oil-based canvas. On the right, woman with ruby pendant. Again, these lighter moods are interspersed with beautiful technique, rather like Poissonné, where the PVA pulls in an interesting series of characteristics, where Ribeiro uses it to great effect against the opposing medium of the oil paint. In his Commonwealth Institute lecture notes from 1972, Ribeiro expounds on this approach. The work represents this organic element in the physiological sense. What I've tried to do is take a painting and break it down, somewhat like a child's jigsaw puzzle, and then reconstruct the whole again in an embryonic fashion. To do this, I needed to discover or evolve a form. Next image. On the left is Warlord from the Psychedelic Man series, and on the right, Stricken Monk with cat o' nine tails. Warlord on the left is a small faceless portrait, now in the collection of Tate. Frontal view rendered with loose, thickly applied paint over green underpainting. Paint medium has retained an intensely dark, shiny and viscous appearance, with string applied to the surface to add texture. The faceless visage rather reminds you of the mystery and legend often attached to warlords fighting in the bush, and some commentators allied it to Ribeiro's increasingly feelings of disturbing emotion towards the ongoing Vietnam War. The painting was one of the artist's favourite works, exhibited many times. On the right, Stricken Monk with cat o' nine tails from 1968, again sees Ribeiro presenting a faceless figure, a beautiful blue, reminiscent of the Virgin Mary's robes, but an armless figure with a crusted face reminiscent of blood pouring from his head. There are nasty, splintery forms, again, perhaps akin to punishment being rained down upon the body. So there's a distinct vulnerability to the figure. Its torment emerges with a link to the torment and flagellation of Christ as he bore the cross to crucifixion. And next image, please. Here we have a very pulsating, unusual composition. This is Emerging Planet from 1966. There are flying and red tubular forms, bursting red forms, a strange dripping, pouring blue form, which if you look closely, there are two eye holes, and perhaps this figure is a melting recumbent form, but it's very, very hard to tell. Everything is commingling and erupting, so pulsing with life, but with a strange abstract overlook. So one of Ribeiro's more unusual and highly striking images. The artist was living a busy and active life, in and out of his home and studio. The 60s was a time of challenging established societal norms, breaking free of artistic taboos, technological and cultural breakthroughs. Ribeiro recognized this in his founding of a new group. This was the Indian Painters Collective, a group of young Indian artists who lived and worked in London, impatient to organize and create better exhibition opportunities for South Asian artists in the UK. The group's first exhibition, entitled Six Indian Painters, was held in 1964 at India House. Ribeiro and his fellow artists burst into a startled official's office, and the official, luckily for them, took a keen interest in the group and assisted in opening the exhibition. George Butcher, the Guardian's art critic, was a keen supporter. Next image, please. Here, the catalogue of 6 Indian painters on the left, and the High Commissioner welcoming Jenny Lee, the first woman arts minister in the then current Labour government led by Harold Wilson. So she was very taken with the exhibition and with the artists' keen efforts to maximise their position and their arrival on the art scene. Ribeiro also received valuable exposure in the late 60s with 4 solo shows. In 1965, the Everyman Cinema Foyer, Hampstead, was graced with his works. And in 1967, the Economist Intelligence Building, and 2 further exhibitions back in Goa in 1969. An article in Wayfarer magazine in Hampstead covering the Everyman show was instructive. Ribeiro explained to his interviewer that he called his work modern expressionism, with most of the pictures described as dark and heavily outlined, although in the past year he has turned to finer and more simple outlines using brighter colours. The artists also confided that he painted daily as a discipline, irrespective of his mood. His best work was done in the winter, and that he could paint anywhere because my pictures are thought out quite precisely in my mind before I begin to paint. In 1964, the critic Barbara Wright wrote, "His work is immensely positive, as always, and his free, generous, expressionistic style has great impact." And next image. Ribeiro, as much as he tried hard to seek West End gallery exposure, often found it hard. But he had unusual gallerists who had quite an unorthodox approach. Instead of trying to win over landlords or gain a foothold in the established West End gallery world, Nicholas Treadwell opened a fleet of mobile vans which took a selection of work to willing buyers and patrons. Ribeiro himself had also launched Direct Art International, an attempt to bring professional artists and business together. In 1967, Sousa left for America, settling in New York. Ribeiro and his brother kept in touch, and Lance visited him in New York once in the 1970s. Ribeiro and his wife welcomed a second daughter, Marcia, born in January 1970, to join them, and sister Raisa at Belsize Park Gardens. And next image, please. This is Frolic on a Nuclear Playground, 1965, oil and PVA on canvas. A line of rather strange figures haunting in what we now know as the disastrous effects of the nuclear explosion, were it ever to be happening in this country. The fear of this was very, very real in the mid-1960s. Ribeiro's free-flowing approach with these works, producing a series of spectral-like figures, perhaps already irradiated in a terrible landscape. His Psychedelic Man series offered 2 pathways, one towards destruction, the other to transformation, as revealed in his more optimistic works of carnivalesque floating forms, but several other paintings such as this, showing the aftermath of great harm done to the body through radiation, disaster, war, flagellation, or other such dark forces. A review in the Church Times, November 2024, of the Ben-Uri exhibition has identified a spiritual underpinning to Ribeiro's development of his faceless faces, one built on Tantra. The artist described this yogic system as an evolving system, the study of which has led the conscious mind through stages to a point of total acquiescence and negation of the self, apparent goal achieving a kind of faceless, self-effacing form, which offers an interesting analysis and overview of his own personal feelings towards his work at this time. The 1970s, continuing exhibitions and opportunities. Ribero's frustration continued in the 1970s at the attitude both of the mainstream press and the West End galleries, who continued a closed shop, either avoiding coverage of or offering almost no exhibiting opportunities for Indian artists working in the UK. However, the decade also offered rewarding exhibition opportunities of a different kind. It's not possible here to list all the initiatives, exhibitions, and opportunities Ribero was involved in, but they were many. In 1974, he exhibited in further education venues in support of specialist conferences on modern South Asian studies, and the well-known art dealer Margaret Fisher promoted his work from her home in Lambole Gardens in London. He participated in a number of additional shows in the 1970s, including 4 contemporary Indian artists at the 1973 Brighton Festival, and in 1975, 5 Indian artists held at the India Tea Centre in Oxford Street. Next image, please. As well as his larger oil and PVA paintings, Ribero could produce some rather beautiful jewel-like works on a smaller scale, and this interplay between different scale and size and approach characterized much of his work, moving across disciplines, across sizes throughout his life. So again, a small and unusual little abstract, pen and watercolor on paper, just 20.5 by 25 centimeters. Beautiful and beautifully small. Next image, please. On the left, Yantric Shift 3, 1972. On the right, Untitled Abstract. A series of emblematic forms placed in patterns, again, perhaps reminiscent of the meditation rhythms encountered in Tantra, and horizontal and vertical tapering forms guiding and controlling the rhythm of these patterned relationships. But again, on the right, a wonderful fecund bloom-like form interrupts and pours all over the patterning. So Ribero experimenting with different elements of both lyricism, formality, and colourful drama in his paintings. In 1977, the Indian Painters Collective, co-founded by Ribero and fellow Indian artists, now issued a revised manifesto and new group name, the Indian Artists Collective. Marcia Ribero has spoken of the group's frustration at the closed shop tactics of the mainstream galleries towards South Asian artists, but equally an optimism that further shows and opportunities would materialise, voiced by her father, his fellow artists Balraj Khanna and others. Among group shows Ribero participated in this time were India House in 1978, then a new group, the Rainbow Artists Group at the Midland Arts Centre in 1979, Birmingham, and a 1980 show at Berg House, Hampstead, under the banner of IA UK, Indian Artists Living in the UK. And into the 1980s, abstracted geology, the accented landscapes and beyond. Next image, please. Here we have the front cover of the 1986 retrospective exhibition held at the Leicester Museum and Art Gallery. And on the cover was illustrated Ribero's multi-panel construction painting along a hanging line curve from 1979. So now alongside his heads and floating form paintings, Ribero had consistently redefined his interest in the landscape. And from the late 1970s, he had developed a new series of paintings inspired by the geology of North America, particularly the Grand Canyon, and Mexico. Ribero created a series of multiple juxtaposed canvases where sinuous painted imagery snakes across the panels to produce line curves. These were shown in Leicester, and in the exhibition catalogue, Museum Director Patrick Boylan also noted that. Out of these have developed Ribeiro's most recent larger scale paintings, an equally original series of harmonious, abstract-derived landscapes in bands of blue, grey, and purple pastel colours, often reminiscent of gently folded and contorted geographical strata. Examples of these in the next image. On the left, Accented Landscape, Series 2, 1980, PVA on canvas, purchased from the artist for Leicester Museum's collections. On the right, Curvilinear Directions 2, 1980, PVA on canvas. Two distinct paint layers are revealed in the Accented Landscape 2. On the left, pink and blue scraped pigment form the underlayer, overpainted with a series of carefully applied painted strokes, perhaps indicative of a river delta or gently compressed geographical strata. The gentle ambiguity is interesting. Perhaps the one is the geographical strata, the other is the river form. So Ribeiro, playing with notions of vertical, horizontal, land and sky, and the different planar tensions that can erupt where different landscapes are superimposed or juxtaposed with each other. In the 1970s, Ribeiro had separated from his wife and begun a relationship with Brenda Capstick, who worked for the Museums Association and had numerous contacts with bases both in London and Yorkshire. This opened the door to two important solo shows, first in 1978 at the Abbott Hall Art Gallery in Kendal, Cumbria, and secondly the Brian O'Malley Gallery and Art Centre, Rotherham in 1980. Next image, please. Two of the images which Ribeiro had produced, inspired by the Yorkshire landscape, was this on the left, Yorkshire Dale Scene, 1986, watercolour and pen, just 15 by 22 centimetres in dimension. And on the right, Around Lake Windermere, 1977. In 1980, Ribeiro moved to an attic flat in Haverstock Hill, London, which barely contained a by now considerable quantity of his works. Oil and PVA paintings, pen and ink drawings, wooden sculptures, and hundreds of watercolours which he had painted beginning in the 1970s and continuing into the 1980s. The latter works, small in scale, finally executed, feature the landscape in changing seasons, and impressed both Sousa on a visit to London and Patrick Boylan. The artist would occasionally bring these small works out at dinner parties, rather like 18th century curiosities or tiny miniatures. The creation of these works in a flat which was far too small and with far too much work for Ribeiro kept him on the rails. A not inconsiderable achievement for an artist who had achieved a meteoric start in his home country, but had found a staccato and rather bumpy rejection in many ways from his hoped-for large-scale exhibition acclaim. Nonetheless, he persevered. His mood and composure might fluctuate, but his resolve to paint continuously, tirelessly, and as he put it so memorably, with or without joy, never wavered and was continuous. So 1986-87, as we've looked at, retrospective recognition came to Ribeiro. 1986, Lancelot Ribeiro Paintings retrospective was held at the Leicestershire Museum, now Leicester Museum and Art Gallery. The exhibition curated by Patrick Boylan, the museum's director, who became a friend and key supporter of Ribeiro. Boylan had written an article for Arts Review, May 1986, in which he lamented that there must be something seriously wrong with the London gallery system, where an artist of the stature, importance and quality of Lancelot Ribeiro has had only 3 London shows in the past 19 years, all in modest non-central venues. The Leicester exhibition featured 44 paintings in oil and PVA, watercolours and drawn heads, and the geologically inspired abstracts. Next slide, please. Again, an unusual still life, again, breaking free of the traditional perspectival view, and a strange slab or table with organic forms, perhaps partly embryonic in in reference to earlier discussion of Ribeiro's methods. The lovely purple glaze in the background has been scraped into to create the wonderful serried ranks of rectangular forms underneath the table. So again, a wonderful image showing Ribeiro's command of different themes, including the still life. The key follow-up exhibition took place at the Swiss Cottage Library, Camden, in December 1986, including several works from the Leicester exhibition. VIP guests including the Indian High Commissioner and the colourful MP Tony Banks. Sadly, one of the works exhibited at Swiss Cottage was slashed by a vandal, a very sad and shocking occurrence, and which reminded Ribeiro of the still continuing, but if only occasionally, racism that he would sometimes encounter. Again, it had maybe lessened in impact, but would still rear its ugly head at times in a very saddening and disappointing manner. But Ribeiro was forthright and defiant, and Marcia often remarked he didn't take abuse without a fight. Run-ins with authority could follow, but Ribeiro invariably exonerated as the innocent party. We move now to flying landscapes. Despite setbacks and disappointments, the kinds of incidents previously described, Ribeiro continued and now developed a series of works of particular note produced in the mid-1980s. Next image, please. These were termed flying landscapes, and this one in particular now finds itself in the collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum, and was the cover image for the wonderful retrospective, posthumous retrospective held at Asia House in 2013. Restless Ribeiro. David Buckman, Ribeiro's biographer, would write that drama stems from the use of colour, rectangles hurling like boxes in the sky, snake-like forms and aggressive geometrical shapes that defy pictorial logic. Landscape forms are often compressed to the base of the painting, allowing the free flow of colourful skies and pulsing lines. Omitted from the 1989 Hayward Gallery survey show created further disappointment for Ribeiro. This show, The Other Story, featured the development of Afro-Asian artists working in post-war Britain. Balraj Khanna was on the organising committee, and representations were once again made for Ribeiro to be a part of the exhibition, but to no avail. Nonetheless, once more, Ribeiro's spirits lifted, again with success coming in Europe in the 1990s. Next image, please. Germany was more attuned to Lance's psyche, and exhibitions followed in Gallery Signum in Heidelberg, December, January 1991 and 2, in 1994 and 1996. Gallery Leonhard in Basel, Switzerland. German critics liked Ribeiro's imagery. On the left, we have Untitled 1990, Nude Over Frankfurt, acrylic collage on canvas, 118 by 81 centimeters. On the right, Untitled 1992, with a wonderful figure, a wonderful head, a female head, perhaps reminiscent of the Virgin, against a wonderful spiritually deep blue background with red flourishes. German critics liked Ribeiro's imagery. Dr. Helmut Orpel in Der Kunsthandel in June 1994 hit on an essential truth. He develops his work through an interplay between the search for shape and its dissolution. Colour and style are central to their intense effects, and it is exactly in this intensity that the secret of this enormous expressive power lies. Next image shows Ribeiro seated on the floor next to his bed in his Haverstock Hill attic flat. He experienced flooding and problems which led to damage of several of his works, and in a depressed state he wondered whether he should destroy some of them, but thankfully Patrick Boylan and other friends and family dissuaded him from this. Next image. This untitled landscape, the final slide from 2004, shows a wonderful accumulation of Ribeiro's thinking and approach. Flowing river-like forms, semi-transparent, translucent, organic floating forms, perhaps amoeba-like or embryonic. Landscapes dissolving and reforming, and a wonderful sense of contour, rhythm, drama, lyricism, and mystery encapsulated in this work. Ribeiro's death in 2010 was very sad, but he'd had a 50-year plus artistic career. He'd known disappointments, but great joy as well, and had continued to paint tirelessly. Reclaiming an unjustly neglected artist encompassed acquisitions entering regional and national art collections, exhibitions, including the celebratory Restless Ribeiro, the Asia House in 2013, 2018 second retrospective, Lancelot Ribeiro, A Voyage of Discovery, held at the New Walk Museum, and new gallery interest coming from the West End, including particularly the Grosvenor Gallery, with its focus on art of the South Asian diaspora, and taking Ribeiro's work to America, to India, and a variety of mixed shows, culminating in the present exhibition, of course, at Ben-Uri, Heads in and Out of Our Time. And my conclusion, like the first German Expressionists, Ribeiro found his own modernist voice in his time, exploring the significance of colour matched with dynamic fluid form, images expressing a spectrum of moods with a psychological presence. The fusion of Cubism and Expressionism in the most ambitious of his townscapes, and the continuous development and refining of heads, bodies, and the landscape, open to changing style, scale, and approach to attain a successful motif, demonstrate an artist of tireless energy and endless searching imagination, an authentic Indian expressionist who we are continually rediscovering today. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. That was a wonderful talk and took us right through, of course, from the beginnings of Ribeiro's career to the end. And I've left that slide on for a couple of minutes while we just finish up. I am not sure whether there are any questions from our audience, but perhaps if not, I could just conclude with asking you one question. Hard to ask only one, of course, but as we're just a little over time. And it was really interesting how you drew together the 20th century German expressionists and sort of familiar themes that we could recognize in Ribeiro's work, although, as you've demonstrated, he went far beyond that. Do you think there was a consciousness of those German expressionists behind those earlier experiments in particular?
I think it's possible. Margaret Fisher was also a dealer in German expressionism, and a number of the smaller galleries in London would have had expressionist or allied works by modernist artists coming through. So Ribeiro, through his various contacts, I believe would have been exposed to it as he searched for drama and power in his works. So I think there would have been, perhaps, albeit indirectly, a connection which Ribeiro perhaps would have drawn upon in developing his own work, but very much in his own time and his own idiom.
Yes, that seems to sum it up very well. Well, I'm sorry to bring this evening to a close, but I'm conscious that some of our audience may need to continue their evenings. So I'd like to thank you, Simon, for such a rich and really full talk covering that whole career, which was really welcome and made the perfect conclusion to Marsha's previous two talks, looking at her father's career. I hope you'll join us next week for a talk by Hormaz Nariwala, contemporary Indian artist who's also on show. And we will be having a discussion looking at his career. Just before we go, I can see there's a comment there, which is actually from Marcia Ribeiro, who thanks you very much, Simon, for the very insightful talk. I'm sure that we all echo those words. So thank you again, and thank you for joining us, everyone. And do come and see the works for yourselves in the last couple of weeks of the show. Thank you and good evening.